Deep in Petra's red cliffs, archaeologists found a hidden tomb. Inside, there were 12 skeletons. They remained untouched for over 2,000 years, and that's a really weird thing. Most tombs in Petra have been looted, so what makes this find stand out? Let's figure it out. This is the ancient city of Petra. Its huge sandstone cliffs are hard to forget. No wonder it's one of the new 7 wonders of the world. The buildings here are carved straight into the rock, and it already makes the place look unreal. But Petra has also been a star in the archaeology world for a long time. Once, Petra appeared in the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Some scenes were filmed right in front of the famous building called Al-Khazne, or the Treasury. But recently, something even more exciting happened there in real life. A TV team from the show Expedition Unknown came to Petra to film a new investigation. And while they were there, archaeologists made a huge discovery. They found 12 human skeletons and several ancient objects. All of them were buried under the ground in front of the treasury, hidden there for about 2,000 years. Archaeologists didn't start digging right away. First, they used a special tool called ground-penetrating radar, something like an X-ray for the ground. Instead of guessing where to dig, the machine scans underground and shows shapes that might be tombs or empty spaces. Anyway, when the team looked at the radar data, something interesting showed up. The patterns looked very similar to places in Petra where tombs had already been found before. That was a big clue that something might be hiding underground. After seeing the results, the authorities of Jordan gave permission for the excavation. That's when the team finally started digging under the famous site. And that's how they uncovered the skeletons and ancient artifacts. Interestingly, many tombs in Petra have been found completely empty, because over the centuries, anything valuable was taken by looters, or simply disappeared with time. But this tomb was very different. Inside, the team discovered 12 human skeletons and a few ancient objects. Some of the bones even had mold on them. That happened because Petra is carved into sandstone cliffs. Sandstone is quite porous, which means it can soak up water like a giant sponge. The area sometimes floods, and moisture likely slowly made its way into the tomb. Along with the skeletons, the archaeologists found stuff made of bronze, iron, and ceramic. One object stood out: a ceramic chalice resting in the arms of one of the buried people. It was almost as if the person had been holding it when they were laid to rest. Mysteriously, the cup looked a lot like the Holy Grail from the Indiana Jones movie. The famous building above the tomb, the Al-Khazne, stands near the main entrance to the city. It's believed to be at least 2,000 years old. This huge structure is carved directly into the sandstone cliffs. Today, it's one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world. But even though the treasury is so famous, archaeologists still don't fully understand its history. One reason is that many of the nearby tombs didn't contain many artifacts, and without things to study, it becomes much harder to figure out exactly when the building was made or how it was used. That's why the team was so excited. The discovery could help them learn more about the ancient people who lived in Petra and built the city. The location of the tomb might already be an important clue. You see, being buried right in front of the treasury was probably a huge honor. The human remains themselves could also tell an interesting story. The skeletons were still lying in their original positions without being moved around or disturbed by looters. That's why scientists can study them much more carefully to learn things like how old these people were, how they lived, or if they were healthy. We could also learn more about the place those people called home, the ancient city of Petra. It was built more than 2,000 years ago by the Nabateans. Starting around the 4th century BCE, this desert city became the center of their kingdom and an important stop for trade across the Middle East. The location helped a lot. Petra sits in a valley surrounded by mountains, and the main entrance is a long, narrow canyon called the Al-Sik. Because the path is so tight, the city was easy to defend and hard for enemies to attack. Thanks to these factors, the city grew quickly. At its peak, around 30,000 people may have lived there, but the city sits in a dry desert canyon. Natural water is kinda limited there. So how did so many people live in Petra? The answer is clever engineering. The Nabateans built a water system that was incredibly advanced for its time. They didn't rely on one water source. It was a whole network carved directly into the rock. They cut channels, pipes, and storage tanks into the cliffs. This helped them guide water from nearby springs into the city. It was like an ancient plumbing system built entirely out of stone. Even better, the water didn't just flow straight into the city. First, it passed through special settling basins where dirt and sand could sink to the bottom. After that, the water was stored in large reservoirs surrounded by thick stone walls, which helped keep the water cooler in the desert heat. Flash floods were also a big danger in the canyon. When heavy rain fell in the surrounding mountains, water often rushed down the narrow valleys. To deal with that, the Nabateans built dams and channels that redirected the floodwater into storage reservoirs. Another intriguing thing about Petra is the location of its main buildings. In 2013, researchers found that several important monuments lined up with the sun during key moments of the year, like the solstices and equinoxes. Scientists now believe that the buildings may have worked like giant calendars, helping people track the seasons in a desert landscape. Natural signs of time can be hard to notice there. Another Petra mystery is three massive stone blocks, the Qin blocks. They go back to around the 2nd century BCE and are some of the first big tombs built in Petra. Two of them have burial chambers inside, and the third one even has a grave on top, like a little rooftop coffin. No one really knows exactly why they were built. Most experts say they were tombs, but some think they may have been carved to honor deities or used in rituals. But however great Petra was, things started to change in 106 CE. That's when the powerful Roman Empire took control of the city and made it part of their territory. Trade didn't completely stop, but the city slowly lost some of its importance. Later, a large earthquake in 551 CE caused serious damage to the area. It could have been the final blow for a city that was already in decline. Over time, Petra was eventually abandoned and became known as the Lost City. But there's another nickname people used much more often, the Rose City. The name comes from the color of the cliffs around Petra. The sandstone rocks have a reddish-pink color, especially when the sun is low in the sky. What tourists see today is just a tiny slice of Petra. Some estimates say archaeologists have only dug up about 15% of the city. Visitors go through the narrow Seek, gape at the 130-foot-high treasury, walk along tomb-lined streets, and climb over 800 steps to reach the monastery, Al-Dir. But that's like seeing the tip of an iceberg. The rest is still buried. Petra keeps surprising us. In 2016, researchers used satellite images to spot a huge, previously unknown monument. The platform is massive, about 184 by 161 feet, and has columns along one side. Pottery fragments suggest it's over 2,150 years old. So basically, even after centuries of exploration, Petra is still full of secrets. They're just waiting to be uncovered.
Now picture a tomb locked for 1,400 years, and then, suddenly, poof, it's open. What could be inside? An ancient curse or exciting discoveries? Maybe the former, since a giant stone owl is guarding the entrance with the owl's beak clamping down on a human face like it's swallowing a soul. Now, it's not just a picture this situation. The discovery probably happened like this. The archaeologists were at a place called San Pablo Huizo in southern Mexico. At one point, they stumbled upon something that resembled an entrance. Ooh, where did it lead? They just had to figure it out. By that entrance, there was a large carved owl. Soon the researchers realized that it wasn't just decoration. The beak of the bird was open, and inside, there was the painted face of a man. Most likely, it was an important leader. For the people inhabiting that region, owls were linked to demise and power. So it was like either the owl was guarding the spirit of the person buried there, or was it holding it captive? Was it even wise to sneak into that mysterious place? Well, the scientists' thirst for answers was more powerful than any fear. So they entered and found themselves inside a tomb. It was made up of two main parts, a front room, kind of like an entrance hall, and a deeper burial room. There was a doorway between these two rooms. It was covered in carvings. At the top, there was a stone beam with special symbols on it. Those symbols worked like names based on a person's birth date. On each side of the doorway, there were carvings of a man and a woman wearing detailed headdresses. The researchers thought they could have been placed there like guards, watching over the tomb. The walls were still painted in bright colors – white, green, red, and blue. It was an astonishing view, and the paintings actually told a story, showing a funeral procession. People were carrying bags of something called copal, which is basically a tree resin. The locals, called Zapotecs, burned it like incense during ceremonies, kind of like how people today often light candles or incense during special rituals. Besides, the archaeologists found carved symbols that work like a calendar. A bit later, the researchers found out that the tomb was about 1,400 years old. It came from the Zapotec civilization, and what made it so special was how well everything inside was still preserved. It was like opening a time capsule that hadn't been touched for over 1,000 years. Interestingly, they didn't just randomly find it. Officials started looking into the site after someone reported looting. When scientists checked it out, they realized they had stumbled onto one of the most important discoveries in Mexico in the last decade. The tomb dates back to around the year 600, when the Zapotec people were thriving in the area. They were sometimes called the Cloud People, and they built a powerful civilization long before the Spanish arrived. Even today, many people in Mexico still speak Zapotec languages. Right now, experts from the National Institute of Anthropology and History are working carefully to protect the tomb and study everything inside. They're looking at things like pottery, symbols, and even a few human bones they found there. One of the most exciting things about this discovery was that many other Zapotec tombs found in the region had already been looted before archaeologists got to them. That means we lost a lot of history. Luckily, this tomb was miraculously mostly intact. Now scientists are focusing on protecting the tomb. They're carefully controlling the air and humidity inside because even small changes can damage it, documenting the artwork, and studying the carvings and symbols. But ancient tombs aren't always hidden deep underground, like in adventure movies. Sometimes you can find them right under a busy city. In 2023, archaeologists made a bizarre discovery on the edge of Chapultepec Park in Mexico City. They found a group of graves that are about 3,500 years old, older than most ancient pyramids in Mexico. There were 10 tombs shaped a bit like upside-down bottles or bells, wide at the bottom and narrower at the top. About half of them had human remains inside, 4 women and 1 man, mostly young adults. These people likely lived in a large village in the area during the early and middle pre-classic periods. That's long before the Aztecs ever existed. One of the archaeologists explained that people had been living in that whole area before a volcano had changed everything. That volcano is the Chilo volcano, and when it erupted, it basically buried parts of the landscape under lava. Because of that, the ground where those tombs were stayed sealed and untouched for over 3,000 years. The Chilo volcano is what's called an ash cone volcano. Basically, it looks like a classic volcano shape anyone would draw, round at the bottom and rising into a cone. It's about 1,000 feet tall with pretty steep sides, like walking up a hill that tilts about 30 to 40 degrees, which is definitely not an easy climb. Scientists believe Chilo erupted sometime between 245 and 315 CE, based on radiocarbon dating. When it blew, it wasn't a small event. It completely changed the landscape. Lava spread out and formed what we now call the Pedregal de San Angel lava fields, covering a huge area south of modern-day Mexico City. Imagine a thick, slow-moving wave of molten rock turning everything in its path into solid stone. One of the biggest victims of this eruption was Teotihuacan, which was once a major and advanced city in Mesoamerica. The lava literally buried it, freezing it in time under layers of rock. After that, the people who lived there had to leave and spread out to other regions. On the bright side, this movement of people, kind of like a forced migration, helped spread their culture across central Mexico. It may even have influenced the development of nearby cities, like Teotihuacan. Sometime later, it became one of the most powerful urban centers in the region. But this story has a twist. Not all scientists agree on the timing. Some think that a series of big eruptions and the destruction of Teotihuacan might have actually started earlier, around the 1st century BCE. So, depending on which history you look at, this disaster either happened a bit later in Roman times or even earlier, back when ancient civilizations in Mexico were still developing. Either way, it was a catastrophic event that reshaped both the land and the lives of the people living there. But let's get back to the tombs. They aren't huge. Most are about 3 to 6.5 feet wide and up to 5 feet tall. Picture something about the size of a small closet or a big storage bin you could crouch inside. Archaeologists call them bell tombs because of that rounded bottle-like shape. This style isn't unique to just one place. We've found similar tombs across different parts of Mexico. It means people must have shared their ideas, like trends spreading between regions today. Another curious thing is that this wasn't a one-time burial site. The team found later burials too, which means people kept coming back to that spot for generations. It was a place that remained important to a community for hundreds of years. Inside the tombs, archaeologists found offerings buried with those who had passed away. There were tools made from deer antlers, a cup, and small female figurines. They were probably personal items or symbolic gifts, similar to how people today might leave flowers or meaningful objects at a grave. All those items have been moved to the National Museum of History for careful study. Experts use them to figure out more about how those people lived. Luckily, this isn't the only discovery in the area. Construction work around Zapotec Park has been turning up all kinds of history lately. In fact, not long before this, archaeologists even found a 16th century cemetery from less than 100 years after the fall of the Aztec Empire after the Spanish conquest.
Archaeologists in Panama kept finding chiefs covered in gold under a plain sunburned field. Weird enough, then they found chief regalia so small it could only belong to a child. That discovery shifted the interpretation of the site. El Cano was no longer just a rich ceremonial site. It looked more like a place where power could pass from one generation to the next. And now, a newly opened chamber there has expanded that picture. El Cano stands apart from the usual ancient gold story. The newest chamber, dated to around AD 800 to 1000, didn't just produce shiny artifacts. It added another piece to a much larger pattern. Archaeologists found pottery, gold ornaments, and a central high-status person marked out by where the gold was placed. This was not random wealth in the dirt. It was a public statement about rank. The objects themselves are vivid. 2 bracelets, 2 earrings, pectoral ornaments decorated with bats and crocodiles. Those are not the kind of items someone tosses in casually. They were chosen to say something. In a world with no billboards, no spotlights, and no giant stone inscriptions, gold did the talking. It told everyone exactly who mattered most in that chamber. The location makes this even more striking. Not Egypt, not Peru, not some famous archaeological landscape packed with giant ruins, central Panama. Historically, this region was often treated as the place between the main acts of the ancient Americas, wedged between the Maya to the north and the great Andean cultures to the south. El Cano repeatedly challenges that older view. That old assumption existed for a reason. This part of Panama does not hit you like a stone-built empire. There's no skyline of huge temples, no carved dynastic walls, no dramatic ruins screaming a powerful society was here. In tropical Central America, a lot of everyday life was built in materials that don't age gracefully. Wood, thatch, fibers, skin, feathers. Most of it simply doesn't stick around for 1,000 years. So when gold survives, it becomes one of the loudest voices left. And El Cano did not give up that voice quickly. Julia Mayo's team began geophysical surveys there in 2005. By 2010, they had dug a pit about 16 feet deep and uncovered a chief covered in gold. Then the site kept escalating. More ornaments appeared. More chambers turned up. More evidence started linking this field to a whole ceremonial landscape. This was not a lucky weekend dig. It was years of slow, patient work, turning a quiet pasture into one of the biggest archaeological stories in Panama. The contrast is striking. From the surface, El Cano looks ordinary, the kind of place where you'd expect grass, cattle, and heat, not dynasties. But under that ordinary ground, archaeologists found symbols of authority designed to be seen from a distance. Polished gold would have caught the harsh sunlight. Chest ornaments likely flashed when a leader moved. Animal imagery, bats, crocodiles, and other powerful creatures turned jewelry into a visual language of authority. This was status you could spot instantly, and the newest chamber matters because it is not standing alone. Mayo said the site has produced 9 similar chambers and that this was a place where elite individuals were laid to rest for about 200 years. This finding expands the interpretation of the site. One rich chamber is interesting. A ceremonial resting ground used by powerful people across multiple generations suggests something else entirely. It begins to resemble a long-running system. You can see that system even more clearly in another major El Cano find from 2024. Archaeologists uncovered the shared chamber of an important Kokle lord buried around 750 to 800 CE. Inside were gold ornaments, ceramic objects, bells, skirts, and a set of flutes. The team dubbed him the Lord of the Flutes, which sounds almost legendary until you remember this is not a myth. It's a real person from a real ceremonial tradition found in the same site. The scale grows even larger around that burial. Researchers found many other individuals placed in the same setting. Reports said the total could reach more than 30 people. At that point, you are no longer looking at one important person with a collection of objects. You are looking at an event, a choreographed display, a message to everyone watching that this leader stood at the center of a much bigger social order. This interpretation is supported by research. A 2020 study of El Cano's multiple chambers found the same basic pattern again and again. One highest status individual in each other, people arranged around that central figure, and a strong sense that the whole composition represented social order. The authors also concluded that some of these final ceremonies involved very harsh ritual practices. The layout itself was part of the performance of power. Now go back to the child-sized regalia, because that might be the strangest clue of all. One of Mayo's earlier breakthroughs came when she realized a set of tiny gold objects was too small for an adult. They appear to have belonged to a baby adorned like a chief. Later, the team found gold arm cuffs on the skeleton of a 12-year-old boy. Both finds point in the same direction. Status here may not have been something a person earned late in life. It may have started at birth. That implication is significant. If rank passed from father to son, then El Cano was not showing us a few isolated leaders. It was revealing a hereditary power system. That means established families, succession, and rules strong enough for an entire community to recognize them. Gold-working specialists had to exist, ceremonial knowledge had to be preserved, labor had to be organized. These were not loose little villages improvising everything as they went. This was structure. It also explains why El Cano feels bigger than a treasure story. Gold draws attention first. The real subject is political sophistication. The objects are only useful because of what they reveal: hierarchy, ceremony, inherited authority, and a leadership class that could stage power in a way everyone understood. Gold is what catches your eye first. The social system is what keeps the site interesting once the shine wears off. There is another reason El Cano matters so much. Less than 2 miles away sits Teotihuacan, the older Panamanian site that had long provided the main evidence for this gold-rich tradition. For years, Teotihuacan was the big reference point. Then El Cano started turning up its own chiefs, its own ornaments, its own ceremonial patterns. Suddenly, this was not one isolated hotspot. It was a broader cultural world, hiding in plain sight across the same landscape. Once you imagine that world, El Cano becomes incredibly visual. No giant stone monuments. Fine, the ceremony can still feel huge. Flutes playing, bells moving, gold breastplates flashing, beads sewn into clothing, animal symbols broadcasting lineage and rank. One early chief found at El Cano wore gold breastplates, arm cuffs, a bracelet of bells, a belt of hollow gold beads, and more than 2,000 tiny gold spheres arranged as if sewn onto a sash. That is not subtle fashion. That is ceremonial theater. Imagine one of these final ceremonies. A leader is placed at the center, gold catches the light. Music carries across the field. Companions are arranged with strict meaning. Everyone present can read the scene without a single written word. This person held the highest place. These families mattered. This order continues even now. The point was not private grief. The point was public memory and public hierarchy. That is why El Cano changes the history of Panama in a very specific way. It does not just add one more archaeological attraction to the map, it shows that central Panama had its own powerful chiefs, its own ceremonial specialists, its own symbols of rank, and probably its own dynastic lines. This region was not just absorbing importance from bigger neighbors, it was generating its own, and the site is still making that point clearer. El Cano has already revealed multiple elite chambers across years of excavation, and each new one expands the story. So the key discovery here is not a bracelet, or an earring, or even a chamber filled with gold. It is the realization that an ordinary Panamanian field was hiding a cemetery of rulers and clues to a forgotten power system that had been there the whole time, just waiting for someone to look deeper.
Archaeologists recently found something fascinating from a forgotten Maya kingdom, a tomb hidden in a collapsing pyramid. Inside, there was a king buried for 1,700 years, a jade mask that looks almost human, but not quite. And all this thanks to the looters who missed it by just 6 feet. They stumbled upon it in 2022 in the dense jungles near the border of Guatemala, Mexico, and Belize. In Mayan times, this little place used to be called Chachkitam. It's a lost city, half swallowed by jungle. This place meant pretty much nothing compared to other big Mayan cities, like Tikal or Teotihuacan, or so we thought. The team found a tomb of a Mayan ruler. The artifacts, the names of kings, all this revealed that Chachkitam wasn't just some tiny village. It was a pretty important place for that culture. And what they found inside that tomb may rival the treasures of any Maya metropolis. The tomb's ceiling had collapsed long ago, but the offerings were still inside and remained intact even after centuries. They recovered over 16 spondylus shells. These things were used by the ancient elite for power and rituals. That meant that whoever the tomb was related to, it was someone wealthy, of high status, who got themselves a ceremonial burial. Archaeologists also found carved femur bones. They were etched with hieroglyphs and names. Maya literally wrote their history in human remains. Researchers want to dive super deep and get a DNA analysis on the bones. Maybe that will help uncover familial ties, origins, or health problems these people might have faced. And most important of all, the mosaic jade mask. It was pieced together from luminous green tiles into an expression that feels almost human, almost alive. A lot of people were joking that it's just like Jim Carrey's mask in the famous movie. But it wasn't a magical artifact. That was the face of a forgotten Maya king, staring out at us after 1,700 years of silence. His name was etched into the femur bones, Itzam Kokaj Balam. Historians think this might be the ruler who reigned around 350 BCE. Unfortunately, this period is super underdocumented. We barely know anything about those times, but it looks like he was pretty important to the locals. One of the bones even showed a carved figure holding a deity's severed head. The deity's head looks exactly like the jade mask. Perhaps this was supposed to be the king himself, defeating some mythological villain. Other inscriptions mention the king's father and grandfather. That links Chachkitam to the mighty Maya capitals we mentioned, Tikal and Teotihuacan. Tikal was once the beating heart of the Maya world. It was a fascinating megapolis. A city rose from the Guatemalan lowlands with towering step pyramids that scraped the sky. That place was home to tens of thousands of people. It was also a hub of art, astronomy, and culture. The rulers were worshipped almost as living deities. Their deeds were carved into stelae that still stand amid the howler monkeys. Teotihuacan was located even further north. Now that was a mystery of another kind. It wasn't really Mayan, but rather Central Mexican. But still, that was a true metropolis, one of the largest cities in the world during its time. It was most famous for its Avenue of the Dead and colossal structures like the Pyramid of the Sun. It was a rich cultural center that had a worldwide influence. For centuries, both Tikal and Teotihuacan seemed to have completely different cultures. Tikal was a flourishing city-state where people loved reading, astronomy, and beautiful architecture. Teotihuacan was a titanic militaristic superpower. Two big centers of Mexico, separated by 600 miles of jungle and mountains. Compared to these imperial capitals, Chachkitam was a whisper. But it looked like this Itzam guy from the tomb wasn't just a ruler of a random village. He seemed to have political ties in ancient Mesoamerica. The craziest part is that we almost lost this piece of history, all because of the looters. At some point in the past, grave robbers had tunneled dangerously close. They stopped digging just 6.5 feet away from the tomb. That's just like in that meme with the diamonds. Sometimes you stop digging right before you hit it big. But in our case, thank heavens they didn't get there first. That's how close we came to losing a piece of history. In an almost poetic irony, it was the looters' tunnels themselves that led Estrada Belli's team to the site. Archaeologists have been looking around and using the so-called LiDAR technology. That's basically laser beams shot from high above, which help them map the spot. It's like taking X-rays of the jungle floor. And that's when they found the little signs of intrusion. They quickly realized that if someone was digging here, they were probably looking for something important. Without the failing looters, they might have walked past a discovery. In any case, archaeologists want to keep searching. They might even find more chambers buried inside the abandoned pyramid. We just keep finding mysterious things related to the Maya. Recently, buried deep within the ruins of Tikal, archaeologists found a house, and in that house, a limestone altar. It was covered in vibrant murals of red, yellow, and black. What's weird is that this build wasn't made by Maya. It was unmistakably Teotihuacan in style. And just like the tomb from before, it was made about 1,700 years ago. The altar was discovered inside a Maya-era residence known as Group 6DX7. It stood 3.5 by 6 feet right in the center of the home. That was very typical for Teotihuacan traditions. It bore a mural of the storm god. That was also a central deity in the Teotihuacan pantheon. But this altar depicted no kings and no rulers. That's very weird. As we said, Maya worshipped and honored their dynasties and political power, putting them pretty much everywhere, like some merch. But instead, this altar worshipped the deities alone, and it did so in the heart of Maya's main capital, Tikal. When archaeologists dived deeper, they saw it as unmistakable proof that Teotihuacanos not only came to Tikal, they thrived there. This house wasn't some trade outpost. People actually lived in it. Teotihuacanos built homes, practiced their rituals, and left their deities behind in this city. And Maya seemed to be chill about that. Researchers think this was a home for some elite people from Teotihuacan, or maybe it belonged to Mayans who practiced Teotihuacano culture and deeply respected it. But it might be something darker than a simple, friendly multiculturalism. The two cities weren't in the best relationship. There was some tension, maybe even surveillance. The house and the altar were probably built around 300 to 400 BCE. That was a period when Tikal was rising in power. This might have caught the attention of the mighty empire to the north. It's almost as if Mayans poked the beast. By 400 to 450 BCE, that attention may have become something sinister. The altar could have actually been the symbol of domination. Had the Maya of Tikal truly welcomed their guests, or did they come here and bluntly started building foreign altars in sacred spaces? Did Teotihuacan use this as some kind of soft invasion? In that case, it would make sense for Mayans to destroy that place or vandalize it somehow. Mayans regularly buried their buildings and rebuilt on top of them. But for some reason, this altar remained untouched. Mayans found it and buried it with the surrounding buildings as they were. No vandalism, no destruction, no rebuilding even. Looks like they had some complicated feelings about Teotihuacans. It was a time when cultures clashed, fused, overlapped, and possibly spied on each other. Perhaps one day we'll learn more about what really happened among these ancient civilizations. Not many civilizations are as mysterious as ancient Egypt, a powerful empire that lasted over 3,000 years. It gave us pyramids that still stand and myths that still inspire. It's one of the most explored places on Earth, yet somehow we still find exciting stuff. In Abydos, archaeologists just uncovered a 3,600-year-old royal tomb. It's huge! It has golden hieroglyphs of deities covering the entrance. But the pharaoh's name? It's not there. It's missing. Who was this ruler? And what new chapter could this open in Egypt's story? If there's one place in Egypt where the line between life and demise feels thinner, it's Abydos. To the ancient Egyptians, this was sacred ground. They believed it was the burial place of Osiris, the god who literally passed away, had his remains separated, and came back to life to rule the underworld. Because of that, Abydos became Egypt's spiritual gathering place. Pharaohs built amazing temples here, like the Temple of Seti, famous for its King's List, a wall that has the names of 76 pharaohs carved in it. Pilgrims came from across Egypt, leaving offerings and participating in Osiris festivals, where his demise and rebirth were ritually reenacted. It wasn't just symbolic worship, it was Egypt's version of Comic-Con. But instead of cosplaying superheroes, people reenacted gods coming back to life. Obviously, pharaohs competed to be buried as close to Osiris as possible. Abydos became part cemetery, part holy city, part afterlife insurance policy. Fast forward thousands of years, and we still uncover remarkable stuff around Abydos. That's the case with the recently discovered tomb. In early 2025, a joint team of researchers from the US and Egypt decided to dig beneath a rocky rise ominously called Anubis Mountain. You remember Anubis, the jackal-headed deity who guarded cemeteries. The uncovered royal burial was hidden 23 feet below the surface. Sadly, even though it eluded archaeologists for so long, robbers had already taken away with treasures ages ago. They could definitely tell this was a tomb of someone super important. Similar to how you can walk around a mansion with no furniture but still deduce that someone rich must have lived there. The chamber had mud brick vaults rising over 16 feet. That's taller than a female giraffe standing upright. For something built 36 centuries ago, it still felt enormous. However, when you remember that Egyptians were masters of architecture, nothing seems surprising. So no treasures, no golden mask, and sadly, no name. The cartouche that should have spelled the king's identity was unreadable. Egyptian tombs usually bragged about who was inside. In ancient Egypt, a cartouche was basically a big oval name tag for kings wrapped in hieroglyphs. Think of them as VIP passes that worked in both this life and the next. Without it, your soul couldn't check into the afterlife hotel. That's because to the Egyptians, your name, your ren, wasn't just so your teacher could distinguish you from kids with the same haircut. It was a core part of who you were. As long as your ren survived, so did you. To have your name forgotten was considered a fate worse than passing away. A soul cannot journey without a name. That's why you'd see cartouches all over the place, on temples, obelisks, jewelry, statues, and tomb walls. It wasn't there just for the marketing. It kept the pharaoh's presence front and center everywhere you looked. Imagine building a massive tomb only for 3,600 years later to walk in and go, who is this guy again? Not cool at all. That's why it's fair to imagine our nameless pharaoh haunting the robbers for all eternity. So yeah, Cartouche was considered very significant. One of the most famous and mind-blowing examples comes from the tomb of Thutmose III. His burial chamber and sarcophagus were literally shaped like a cartouche. In other words, the entire room was a living architectural symbol of his name. Thankfully, in the recently discovered tomb, not everything was erased. Painted in golden hues at the entrance were two familiar guardians, deities Isis and Nephthys. Isis was the magician who stitched Osiris back together and breathed life into him. Nephthys, her sister, was the eternal mourner and protector of the mummy. Together, they promised that whoever rested here would not face the afterlife alone, and it's one additional proof of the importance of the mysterious pharaoh. So, who could this be? To answer that, we need to go down history lane. This tomb dates back to Egypt's messy chapter called the Second Intermediate Period. Instead of one ruler in charge, the country had many rival kingdoms, each with its own little power base, like a real-life Egyptian version of Game of Thrones. And right in the middle of that chaos was Abydos. For a while, it was home to its own line of kings, the so-called Abydos dynasty. Those weren't the pyramid builders everyone knows, and that's why they're so mysterious. They left behind almost nothing. No great monuments, no sprawling cities, just fragments of names on broken blocks. For centuries, many scholars even doubted they existed at all. That sorta changed in 2014, when archaeologists uncovered the tomb of Senebkay, one of those shadowy kings. Now, everything we know about Senebkay points to him having quite a story to tell. His bones revealed 18 deep wounds, the kind you get in battle. He had blows to his skull, back, and hands, and likely lost his life fighting, making him one of the few pharaohs we know who sadly fell in combat. His tomb was modest, with reused artifacts from earlier kings, but it delivered one priceless thing: proof. Until Senebkay, the Abydos dynasty was just a theory. With him, it became real. And that's why the new discovery could be a big deal. The newly uncovered royal tomb at Abydos shares the same layout and style as Senebkay's. It has limestone chambers, mud brick vaults, and protective deities, although it's much bigger. Which again raises the possibility that we're looking at an even earlier, more powerful ruler of Abydos. Whoever he was, he wanted to be remembered alongside the greats. Which is ironic, because it seems that history tried erasing him. Perhaps additional findings alongside his tomb could tell us more. Yes, there's more, and it's actually pretty cool. Not far from Abydos, in the village of Banawit, archaeologists uncovered a Roman-era pottery workshop. Yeah, you heard that right, a pottery factory close to a pharaoh's burial ground. The site had huge clay kilns, storage rooms, and even broken shards called ostraca. They were basically ancient sticky notes. Except instead of shopping lists, those had receipts scratched onto them in Greek and Demotic Egyptian. Little records of everyday transactions, the kind of thing you'd never expect to find near a lost dynasty king. Honestly, the potters missed a chance. Forget boring receipts, they should have been selling Osiris's mugs and Anubis figurines to pilgrims and tourists. But that's not all. It seems that centuries later, during the medieval period, the same ground became a cemetery. Archaeologists found mud brick graves with skeletal remains. This could mean that Abydos kept its aura of significance for hundreds of years after the age of pharaohs. So why this hill again and again? Is this place really a getaway to the afterlife? It is, after all, the very place where Osiris is said to rest. That belief lingered like a shadow for thousands of years, strong enough to pull in pharaohs and later medieval families. Different rituals, same sacred ground. Although, to be fair, the Romans weren't here for Osiris. They came to make pots. The story of Abydos is not over. The excavations will continue, and who knows what else could be discovered in the future? Today, archaeologists are armed with tools that are basically X-ray glasses for the desert. Every scan could reveal a hidden chamber, or if we're lucky, finally give our nameless pharaoh his wren back to him. In fact, I became strangely invested in finding out who he was. So let's hope for some news soon. It's only a matter of time. Do you have your own theories? Let me know. One more step in the wrong direction, and the crossbows will release their arrows. If you open the wrong door, you'll end up in a river of mercury. It's almost impossible to get out of this place, but it is even more difficult to get here. No, this is not a location from an adventure movie, but a treasure hunter. This is a real giant tomb filled with traps and streams of toxic mercury. And it's not somewhere deep in the Amazon jungle or an unknown island. This tomb is located in central China, near the city of Xi'an. And you know what the coolest thing is? This tomb was built more than 2,000 years ago. And even now, in the 21st century, we still don't know how to get there. But let's start from the beginning. Many of you have probably heard of terracotta statues. Thousands of clay sculptures of people. Those statues were first found in 1974, when a group of peasants were digging decks near Xi'an. They found a detailed human-sized figure, and that was 1 out of 1,000. Each figure was made as realistic as possible. Each of them was unique and had its distinctive details. More than 50 years have passed, and scientists are still digging up these sculptures. The number has already exceeded 8,000. But what are they doing there? What is their purpose? Terracotta sculptures are kinda guarding the tomb of Emperor Qin Shi Huang. He was such an influential man in China that he wasn't just buried in a tomb. His servants created a giant coffin complex the size of a small town. So, if thousands of clay guards symbolically protect this place, it's difficult to imagine what's in the center of this ancient, gigantic tomb. But first, let's find out who Qin Shi Huang was, and then move on to the dangerous traps. He was the first son of the ruler of the kingdom of Qin. It was one of the 6 kingdoms that existed on the territory of modern China. In 2059 BCE, when Qin Shi Huang was born, those 6 kingdoms were independent and separated from one another. Moreover, there was a strong conflict between them that lasted for more than 200 years. But Qin Shi Huang turned out to be the man who managed to conquer and unite all these kingdoms. He became more than just a king. He became the first emperor of China. But how did he complete a seemingly impossible task? Natural disasters, clever strategy, tactics, and skills helped him to conquer the 6 kingdoms. Scientists are still arguing about some of the details of how this happened. All that can be said is that Qin Shi Huang was a very wise and intelligent emperor. So it's not surprising that his burial turned out to be so huge. He was buried in the largest and most luxurious funeral complex in the history of China. The area the size of a small city contains many underground caves filled with things an emperor could need in the afterlife. In ancient China, as well as in ancient Egypt, people believed that when an emperor went to the other world, he could take with him those things that were buried with him. Unfortunately, sometimes it could be people, but Qin Shi Huang acted wisely and correctly. He decided to bury clay statues. But the coolest thing is that the architects and builders of this complex made it impregnable. The whole area holds many secrets, historical artifacts, and priceless objects. There's a beautiful place with the emperor's body in the center of this tomb. Imagine how many treasures you can find there, and all of them were meant to remain untouched and unseen by other people. And we probably won't be able to get to them, at least in the near future. Ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian wrote something about the tomb about 100 years after the emperor's burial. He said that this place had dangerous traps inside the tomb that would destroy anyone who dared to enter the tomb. The engineers installed crossbows with loaded arrows and also poured a huge amount of mercury, simulating the movement of rivers. Of course, that was 2,000 years ago, and crossbows probably don't work anymore. But what about mercury? This toxic metal has no expiration date. It's shiny and moves quickly in liquid form. It looks beautiful, but don't touch it. Even a small drop of mercury can cause damage to your body. Inhalation of its vapors or ingestion causes damage to nerves, the liver, kidneys, and many other symptoms. And that's just one drop. Imagine how dangerous rivers of this substance can be. Who knows how much mercury was loaded there by the tomb builders? But even if you dodge all the traps and don't end up in the poisonous river, mercury would still be able to harm you. Its vapors can pass through the cracks in the walls. This means that the entire tomb is probably soaked in this substance. And by the way, this is not just a guess. Scientists have measured the mercury level at the excavation site and found that it's much higher than normal. But why mercury? In ancient China, mercury was considered the elixir of youth, the source of immortality. According to the records, Qin Shi Huang often took pills with this element. Perhaps this was the reason that his life ended at the age of 49. In any case, people can damage ancient structures and artifacts during excavations. For example, archaeologists caused great damage to Tutankhamun's tomb during its exploration. You dig around, but then suddenly the entrance collapses and you destroy vases, scrolls, interior decorations, and other stuff. But even if you do everything carefully, the writing and drawings on the walls can be destroyed by sunlight or oxygen. Places where there has been no fresh air and ultraviolet radiation for thousands of years have their own chemical composition that can be damaged by contact with the outside world. In the 1970s, when archaeologists were excavating terracotta sculptures, the paint pigment fell off the statues because of contact with the sun and air. Fortunately, the archaeologists quickly adapted and created a technology that allowed them to get the statues out without damaging the paint. It was a long and careful process, but it was worth it, and here's why. According to ancient writings, the emperor created an underground kingdom with a beautiful palace in the center. He decorated the ceiling of this palace with expensive pearls. You know why? To simulate the stars in the night sky. And that's just the ceiling. It's difficult to imagine how the walls, floor, and tomb of the emperor are decorated. Besides, scientists expect to find many other statues that copy the emperor's servants. So, in simple terms, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang is a paradise for archaeologists and historians. But of course, it will take more than one generation before they extract all the treasures. Some experts predict that the excavation of the entire tomb could take centuries. But of course, new archaeological technologies can change everything. For example, non-invasive research methods mean you don't have to enter the tomb. You can see it through a special device. Another idea is the use of muons. Those are subatomic products that appear as a result of the collision of cosmic rays and atoms in the Earth's atmosphere. The point is that these muons can penetrate through solid objects, just like X-rays. Or how about nanotechnologies? Imagine millions of tiny digger robots climbing into a tomb and starting to scan the area. They transmit the data to a computer, and then scientists create a holographic model. It all sounds cool, but to be honest, the charm of archaeology is lost here. It's one thing when you carefully dig up some ancient artifact with your hands, see it with your own eyes, and scrupulously clean it from the ground. And it's completely different when you watch it on a computer screen. But in any case, technologies using muons or some kind of robots ensure people's safety. It's better if a computer falls into a trap than if it happens to an archaeologist.
In November 1922, a boy walked through the desert mountains of Egypt and discovered some ancient steps carved into the rock. Subsequently, this find became one of the world's largest and most significant archaeological discoveries. This step was part of Tutankhamun's untouched tomb. Archaeologists found about 5,000 ancient objects, including jewelry, fabrics, painted vases, and funeral masks. You've probably seen one of them. It has become one of the most recognizable attributes of ancient Egypt. More than 100 years have passed since then, And now, humanity has finally become close to another large-scale discovery, the tomb of Cleopatra. This queen was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, who sat on the throne from 51 to 30 BCE. There are many ancient records about Cleopatra, her reign, and her unusual personality, but until now, no one has discovered the secrets about her passing away in the burial place. So, one archaeologist, Dr. Kathleen Martinez, has been studying ancient records and temples around Alexandria for decades and concluded that the tomb of the queen should be located under the ancient city of Taposiris Magna, founded in 280 BCE. It was a big city on the northern coast of Egypt where tens of thousands of people were engaged in trade and industry, and it seems that Dr. Martinez's guesses turned out to be correct. She and a group of archaeologists have discovered a secret underground tunnel near Alexandria, with a length of about 0.8 miles. It was cut into the rock under Taposiris Magna's temple. During further excavations, they found many things that indicate Cleopatra's tomb lies in the tunnel's depths. It's also possible that she is buried there together with the Roman commander, Mark Antony. According to ancient records, Cleopatra and Mark Antony loved each other and together opposed the Roman Senate, which declared Antony a traitor. The fact that natural disasters have occurred on the territory of Taposiris Magna for thousands of years can complicate the excavations. Earthquakes and floods destroyed the city and possibly flooded its underground tunnels. But archaeologists hope the ancient tomb remains untouched, and that it hides many treasures and records about the royal life of ancient Egypt during the reign of the last dynasty. There's a chance that excavations will go underwater and in the mud. This will require much time and funding, but archaeologists are sure it's worth it. Anyway, it's too early to say that Cleopatra is really buried there, but scientists have found many things in the tunnel that confirm this, including clay pots, dozens of coins with the image of Cleopatra and Alexander the Great, as well as a bust with the image of the Egyptian queen. Cleopatra is still one of the most popular personalities in Egypt, on an equal footing with Ramesses III and Tutankhamun. She inspired many films, paintings, and books, but what made her so popular? She became famous for her inconsistency. She was a beautiful, intelligent ruler who pulled Egypt out of the crisis and made it a prosperous power. Medieval Arabic texts say she knew chemistry, mathematics, and philosophy, and may have written several scientific books. She knew several languages and had excellent diplomatic skills. At the same time, there are many legends that she was a femme fatale who drove many men crazy. However, there's no evidence that her beauty was incomparable. The image of a stunning model was created by Hollywood when it made several films where famous actresses performed the role of Cleopatra. And the Roman Emperor Octavian, the adopted son of Julius Caesar, specially created the image of Cleopatra as an insidious seductress because he was her enemy. Even though she was born in Egypt, Cleopatra wasn't an Egyptian. Her ancestors were Greeks, among whom was one of the generals of Alexander the Great. However, the people of Egypt loved her. She learned the language and was very sensitive to the traditions of this country. She knew the history, mentality, and customs of ancient Egypt well. She raised the level of its economy and strengthened its status as a world power. Much of this was made possible thanks to her cunning and impressiveness. She loved theatrical performances and lavish celebrations. She knew how to surprise people and put on a show. But behind the exterior image of a luxury lover was an intelligent and calculating ruler. Ancient Egypt was a rich, luxurious country, and Cleopatra did everything to increase its wealth and strengthen its position in the international arena. For example, she was once in conflict with her brother Ptolemy XIII. The queen knew that she wouldn't be able to resist him, so she decided to attract Julius Caesar to their side. The Roman emperor arrived in Alexandria, where Cleopatra wanted to meet him, but Ptolemy knew about her plans and was about to prevent her from coming to Caesar. Then, instead of a rich and noisy arrival, Cleopatra decided to make her visit inconspicuous. She wrapped herself in a carpet or linen bag the emperor's servants carried into Caesar's private chambers. Cleopatra emerged from the carpet and impressed the Roman emperor with her beauty and determination. As a result, they fell in love with each other and became close allies. After some time, she impressed another influential Roman for diplomatic purposes. She arrived to meet Mark Antony on a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars. Cleopatra was dressed in the image of Aphrodite and sat under a magnificent canopy. Her servants dressed like cupids and were blowing her fan and burning incense. But Cleopatra created such a show for a reason. She knew that Antony revered Greek mythology and considered himself the embodiment of Dionysus. As a result, he was so impressed with this woman that he ended up marrying her. Cleopatra defended her crown, strengthened her alliance with Rome, and bore Antony 3 children. In Egypt, they threw big parties and enjoyed wealth with power. However, the relationship of a high-ranking official with the Egyptian queen caused a scandal in Rome. Octavian was Antony's primary opponent in the struggle for power, so he exploited the situation to darken the competitor's reputation. He used propaganda to make Cleopatra an insidious seductress in the eyes of Roman citizens. He accused Antony of succumbing to her charms. The Roman Senate supported Octavian and declared Cleopatra an enemy. In 33 BCE, this conflict reached a high point when Antony's navy clashed with Octavian's fleet. The latter won and forced his enemy to flee to Egypt with Cleopatra. According to some records, they took refuge near Alexandria. Pursued by the Romans, they hid in one of Cleopatra's palaces and met their end. Some legends say that Cleopatra was an expert in poisons. She provoked a venomous snake, a viper or an Egyptian cobra, to bite her. Also, according to another legend, she pricked herself with a poisonous needle. There's a theory that Cleopatra always carried an ampule with poison inside her hairbrush. And when she was cornered, she soaked the needle with this poison and pricked herself. None of this can be said for sure. Scientists are still trying to find out the truth. Perhaps when they reach Cleopatra's tomb, the world will get more answers about her tragic fate. She is considered the last ruler of Egypt. After her passing, Octavian plundered her palaces and temples and returned to Rome, where he became the main emperor. He successfully ruled the country and expanded its borders. His reign ended when he turned 75. World history would have looked different if Cleopatra and Mark Antony hadn't lost that naval battle. By the way, did you know that more time has passed between Cleopatra's reign and Neil Armstrong's flight to the moon than between the reign of the Egyptian queen and the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza? Armstrong took a step on the Earth satellite in 1969, 38 years after the birth of Cleopatra. And the construction of the pyramid took place in 2560 BCE. Imagine how long the history of ancient Egypt is. Cleopatra is closer to us in time than to the pyramids.
We all know how it goes. Homo sapiens are way smarter than Neanderthals. Neanderthals were primitive, and we're much cooler than they were, right? Now, what comes to mind when you hear the word factory? Probably something like this. Lots of Homo sapiens, people, working in different departments, huge production lines, packaging, sorting. You can't fit a Neanderthal into that image, can you? Hey, don't be such an evolutionist. We don't judge people here by the stage of their development, okay? And by the way, Neanderthals had their own impressive factories. No conveyors or industrial robots, but pretty advanced for their time. The production line I'm talking about was located in a place we now call Germany. What's funny is that it's a country that still has plenty of factories and a long tradition of working with machinery, so it feels like a continuation of that tradition. Now, poof, back 125,000 years, to the moment when this very early factory appeared. Around this time, Earth was in an interglacial period, with weather quite similar to today's climate, so conditions may have not been the best, but still fairly comfortable. Neanderthals lived their ordinary lives. They used fire to manage vegetation, gathered plants, and apparently, built plants. Pun intended. So if you thought those hairy guys were savage beasts who spent their time scratching lice off their skin, you may owe an apology to this distinguished gentleman. By the way, this is Carl, and he claims to be the owner of this factory. You seem to have underestimated him, so he's left. But I'll carry on talking about this interglacial breakthrough. Archaeologists have recently shown that Neanderthals intentionally chose a lakeside location to process the bones of at least 172 mammals, including deer, horses and aurochs, a now extinct species of bovine. The study demonstrates that the inhabitants not only broke open large mammal bones to extract marrow, but also ground the bones into thousands of fragments and heated them in water to extract calorie-rich bone grease. Think of it as a food manufactory making flavorful Campbell's soup ready to hit the shelves at your local supermarket. I know it sounds far-fetched, but what I want to show here is that we now have evidence that even Neanderthals had pretty advanced techniques of food processing. This was intensive, organized, and strategic. Neanderthals were clearly managing resources with precision. Some of them were planning hunts. Others were in charge of transporting carcasses, while another group was busy rendering fat in a task-specific area. They definitely had no nutritionists, but they did understand both the nutritional value of fat and how to access it efficiently. Just one example. Scientists now think that when it came down to caching carcass parts, they would do so across the landscape for later transport to the grease rendering site. You know how all factories are supposed to meet production targets? Same here. Experts believe Neanderthals understood there was a certain fat quota they needed to meet to make the literally bone-crushing process worthwhile. Now, you may say, well, it's just one example. It doesn't mean that Neanderthals were that advanced. True, good catch. However, there are more examples, and here's one of them. Technically speaking, in addition to food-related production lines, these guys may have had a chemical production factory. You see, there is evidence that Neanderthals made stone tools using a multi-ingredient adhesive, which they couldn't buy at Dollar Tree for very obvious reasons. The factory headquarters wasn't in Germany this time though, but in Gibraltar, in Vanguard Cave to be more precise. While studying this area, scientists stumbled upon a small hearth that may have functioned as something close to an ancient adhesive workshop. So chances are that Neanderthals were using fire not just for warmth or cooking, but as a controlled tool for producing useful materials. Now, let's see how this hearth worked. If you've ever cooked sauces, you know how they thicken once the temperature goes up. Neanderthals may have spotted something similar while using fire for its basic function, cooking. They put two and two together, and bam! They started glue, or rather, tar production. The controlled fire helped them regulate heat precisely enough to produce a perfectly sticky texture. That tar could then be used to fasten stone blades or other sharp pieces onto wooden handles, with sinew or plant fibers helping secure the joint. If you wonder what the recipe was, scientists managed to reconstruct it, sort of. Basically, it involved burned rock rose leaves, but there was a secret ingredient for the process to work: guano. Guano is what's left of bat and bird feces once they've decayed. It sounds quite disgusting, but it worked, and that's what matters. Let's check out the structure itself. It's quite small. A round pit roughly 9 inches across and about 3.5 inches deep. Its walls are sharply cut, and 2 narrow trenches extend outward to the north and south. The working idea is that Neanderthals packed the pit with rock rose leaves, then sealed it with damp sand and soil, likely mixed with, you guessed it, guano, to limit oxygen entering the chamber. A small fire, probably fueled by grasses and shrubs, would have burned above the sealed pit. As the plant material heated, it released a thick brown resin. Producing that resin required temperatures in the neighborhood of 300 degrees Fahrenheit or more. However, it took scientists some effort to understand what happened inside the hearth. They had to analyze residues from the walls and floor using several chemical techniques, including mass spectrometry. This technique identifies and counts molecules within a sample. It was necessary to reconstruct the likely production method. Once they ran those smart tests, they moved on to the next step, which involved a tad of elbow grease. They recreated the setup themselves, building experimental hearths that matched the original in size, shape, and materials. In 4 test runs, the recreated hearths successfully produced resin, which supported the proposed explanation. Alright, it feels like those prehistoric production lines prove that Neanderthals were much cooler than we thought. A typical idea is that Neanderthals were just wandering hunters, but they probably were not. And it's not only about their production setups. There may be evidence suggesting they organized coordinated hunts that lured wild horses into traps roughly 200,000 years ago. We go back to Germany once again. At the archaeological site of Schonengen, researchers uncovered wooden spears, double-pointed sticks, stone tools, and the butchered remains of more than 50 horses of different ages. After a couple of tests, scientists realized these finds are about 100,000 years younger than earlier estimates. The material was excavated in the 1990s from sediments along what used to be a lakeshore. With the updated dating, scientists think the site reflects a period when Neanderthals were already living across Europe. Zoo archaeologists argue that these hunters could understand horse behavior well enough to organize group hunts, steering entire horse families toward carefully chosen ambush points. Yikes! Chances are that by about 200,000 years ago, Neanderthals were cooperating in increasingly complex ways. Organized hunting, shared planning, and coordinated action may have been part of their social life, and they could have possibly reached levels similar to those seen in early Homo sapiens communities. Earlier estimates placed the Schonengen tools and horse remains at roughly 300,000 years old. There were no labels, of course, so scientists had to turn to pollen preserved in the sediment layers, which they used to match local vegetation changes with known global climate cycles. Under that older timeline, the hunters at the site might have been Neanderthal ancestors or another ancient human species known as Homo heidelbergensis. But the new timeline points more directly to Neanderthals themselves. To refine the age of the site, a team of scientists analyzed how amino acids, the chemical components of proteins, had gradually changed structure after passing. They examined 4 snail shells, 15 tiny crustaceans, and 8 horse teeth from the same sediment layer that contained the spears. Once they measured these molecular changes and combined the results with pollen records and climate data, the researchers calculated how much time had passed since those organisms died. The results consistently pointed to a younger age, around 200,000 years, placing Neanderthals squarely in the role of the hunters behind the Schonengen horse drives.
Now, thousands of years ago, the Sahara Desert was a green valley with rivers, lakes, flowers, various animals, and people who had different DNA. They weren't visitors from another planet or some unknown separate species. In fact, they were quite normal. But their genetic code changed scientists' understanding of how human civilization developed. It sounds a little confusing, but let's start at the beginning. Among the endless dunes of the Sahara, there is a small rock shelter where wanderers can hide from the scorching sun. This place is called Takakori. Recently, it became famous because scientists found 2 mummies there who lived about 7,000 years ago. At that time, in China, people were learning to domesticate pigs. In Egypt, paintings with geometric patterns appeared. Almost everywhere in the world, people were developing agriculture. But what was happening in the Sahara? Scientists analyzed fragments of DNA from the mummies, along with other artifacts found in the cave. They discovered that the bodies belonged to female pastoralists. They lived during a time when the famous desert was known as the Green Sahara because of its humid climate and abundant vegetation. Those mummies belonged to a group of people of unknown origin. Their DNA did not contain the genes typically found in populations that lived in that region. In fact, their genome did not resemble any other known genetic lineage. Surely, there must have been relatives of these people living in other regions. A similar genetic code was found in the remains of hunter-gatherers in the Tafaralt cave, located in Morocco. The DNA of the people from these 2 caves was equally distant from the DNA of people who lived in the southern part of the Sahara. Since their DNA was not similar to other genomes in the region, this tribe must have lived quite separately. They probably did not accept strangers and did not move from place to place. They simply didn't need to, since the Green Sahara had everything necessary for life: a good climate, water, and food. These Takakori people lived within their own community as if they were separate from everyone else. But then, how did they learn about animal husbandry? Today, breeding bulls, goats, and other animals seems completely natural, but in the distant past, it was a real breakthrough. Farming and cattle breeding technologies developed around the world during mass migrations. Imagine a small indigenous group living in the Green Sahara. Suddenly, thousands of outsiders who know agricultural techniques arrive from other regions. They take over the land, drive some locals away, allow others to stay, impose their own rules, and begin cultivating the soil. Their settlement grows, and then they migrate to another area where they spread their technologies again. That's how progress developed in the past, at least that is what scientists thought. Of course, during these migrations, different people mixed with each other, which introduced great diversity into the genetic code. But in the case of the Takakori tribe, there was no diversity. They were not attacked, and large-scale migrations did not affect them in any way. So the question arises, how did they know about cattle breeding? This is what surprised researchers. We were convinced that agriculture spread exclusively because of large-scale migrations. The discovered mummies showed scientists that people simply exchanged knowledge and culture. Perhaps a traveler came to the Takakori settlement, showed them how to breed animals, and left. No genetic mixing occurred, which is why they retained a distinct and separate genetic code. It's also possible that someone from Takakori traveled elsewhere and returned with new knowledge about herding. No one conquered anyone. No one imposed their knowledge or rules. In other words, they did what modern people do. They shared experience and knowledge. This small detail in the genome of the two mummies shows that the ancient world may not have been as cruel and harsh as we once imagined. In a sense, the genetic material inside those mummies tells the story of how the technological and cultural development of humankind has changed over time. But there's also the reverse situation, when the development and progress of human civilization shape our genome. What? It sounds strange. Do microwave ovens affect our DNA or something like that? No, it's much bigger than that. Our DNA was changed by fire. If you look at us through the eyes of nature, we are very strange creatures because of our weird relationship with one of the most dangerous elements in the world. But what's so strange about it? Well, just look at nature. Did you see how people in thrillers about wildlife scare away wolves and bears with fire? It's because it really may work, since many animals are afraid of fire and stay away from it. Some lizards learned how to survive wildfires by hiding in already burned bushes, places where the fire will not return. Evolution has made nearly all living creatures avoid fire, but not humans. We're the only species on the planet that does not run from fire but uses it. No other animals live under a constant risk of burns. Evolution was not prepared for this and had to rapidly adjust our genes to match our behavior. The technology of controlling fire is one of the oldest in the world. We used it to keep warm in cold climates, cook food, produce metal and ceramic objects, build homes, and conquer territories. We put hot food into our mouths and drink hot tea. We're the only creatures on the planet that voluntarily put a potentially dangerous source of heat into our mouths. And this has been happening for thousands of years. Fire is still an essential tool, and all this time, we've been getting burned. No other species on Earth experiences anything close to the number of fire-related damages that humans do. And it's not just about our past. Even today, we interact with burning gas stoves, red-hot car radiators, and boiling water in kettles and saucepans. What about risky equipment in factories? The danger has not disappeared. Surely every person has had a small accident with something extremely hot. I know I have. As a result, through evolution, we developed a unique genome unlike that of any other living being. When we touch something hot and our body begins to heal the damaged part, it feels like a natural ability. But this healing depends on specific genetic mechanisms. Without them, even a small accident could cause serious problems. The development of these genetic adaptations was a complex and lengthy process, since changes in DNA do not happen quickly. While humanity was adapting to fire, intense natural selection was taking place. Some scientists even suggest that we are descendants of those who recovered from burns more quickly than others. Of course, mammals also have adaptations related to fire. Scientists studying primate DNA discovered a set of 94 genes that activate in response to burns. So, what makes us different? In humans, some of these genes evolved much faster and became far more effective at healing and fighting bacteria. So, does it turn out that we have a superpower we never realized we had? Yes, but there's bad news. The same immune response that allows us to heal quickly from burns can also cause serious problems. How is that possible? Well, instead of using examples with real people, let us imagine a mannequin with the same fire-related adaptations as a human. When the mannequin receives a small burn, say from a hot radiator under a car hood, its immune system quickly triggers inflammation, during which immune cells neutralize the damage. It is an aggressive healing strategy, but it works. However, if the mannequin gets a large area burn, that same defense becomes dangerous. The immune system uses the same tactic for major burns as it does for minor ones, creating massive inflammation that can be life-threatening. Why is that? Because evolution developed protection against small incidents around a campfire, but not against massive fires. Interestingly, how do scientists explain our craving for extreme sports and adrenaline? What does our DNA say about this? Well, it's a whole new story.